The Labour Party has come out swinging against the Tory frontrunner, likely Prime Minister this time next week, Liz Truss, saying that she's flip-flopped on the idea of handouts to help with energy bills. Labour, for its part, has said it will freeze bills for 6 months, a policy that on a month-by-month basis costs more than furlough did. How would Labour pay for it all?
Good morning, Tom. Well, we've been very clear about how we would pay for that policy to make sure we don't see that catastrophic increase in the price cap. We've said, first of all, that we would be plugging those enormous holes in the windfall tax that the Conservatives belatedly introduced. So, for example, their investment write-offs that are ultimately meaning many companies are simply not paying much of that windfall tax. We'd stop that. We would start that tax earlier, when actually those record profits started to be made by the oil and gas producers. And I think that really shows whose side Labour is on. You know, it took a very, very long time for the Conservatives to agree to a windfall tax in the first place. They belatedly introduced one, but one full of loopholes. Labour said we would fix those. We would use that money to then make sure that we got people's bills down. And, you know, it's really important that we do this, because energy price rises, as you know, they're a big contributor to inflation. If we manage to stop that price rise, that price cap rise going through, then we would be reducing the rate of inflation. That would, for example, get the cost of government borrowing down as well. So it's really important that Truss actually listens to what Labour's calling for and stops flip-flopping about with all these different plans that she seems to be floating, actually gets a grip and says that she'll commit to Labour's plan.
Now, I'm looking at the numbers here. For debt interest, certainly paying less on that this year would save money. That's getting inflation down, of course, would lead to that. The IFS has said, however, that that would be a false economy because it would be more to charge next year. So whilst in the short term that might save money, it might not create so much room in the long term. And when it comes to the windfall tax, Labour's own numbers say that backdating it and plugging those, as you would describe them, holes, as the government says, investment allowances, that raises just £8 billion. For 6 months of freezing energy bills, assuming that all the forecasts are absolutely correct, that costs £30 billion. That's an enormous gap that doesn't look like it's been filled.
Yeah, sorry, Tom, on the technicalities of some of that, I think I was a little bit confused, if I may say so, around the IFS's point. I think they were saying something subtly different, but I don't want to go into all the detail of that. I don't think it'd be very interesting for the viewer. Just to say there is a third element that would need to be going in here, which is that already allocated funding by government. We think it's important that actually the government says now that it would use that funding to support Labour's plan. You know, they've said that they're going to spend it at some point. We said, well, look, let's allocate it now, because the problem is, unless we take action on those spiralling bills right now, we're going to see what's often described as scarring effects. That's where, for example, you see people losing their homes, you see people being pushed into debt, often for the first time, unsustainable debt that they cannot clear, people then becoming bankrupt. When you have that situation, that imposes a huge cost on our economy for the future. And instead of facing up to that and adopting Labour's plans, which are fully costed, you know, we've gone through those different elements many times before, spelled them out. Now, instead of adopting that plan, unfortunately, the Conservatives seem to be all over the place. I know they've had a leadership contest, but we should have had candidates who were upfront and clear about what they would do. Instead, we have Truss.
Does the Labour Party think that Liz Truss's plans are costed and that Rishi Sunak's plans, as they've been set out, are costed? The Liz Truss, the Rishi Sunak VAT holiday on energy bills, the Liz Truss moratorium on those green levies on energy bills. Does the Labour Party think that those are costed?
Well, actually, in both cases, they've said that they would be seeking to cut taxes in the longer term, but without indicating, particularly in Liz Truss's case, how she would make sure that the public finances... But just on those 2 points, on the VAT and the green levies, does the Labour Party think that those policies are costed? Well, to the extent that we would see less revenue coming in, we don't feel that they do have that long-term plan that's needed.
Because Anneliese, that's the reason I asked, of course, and I think you probably do know this. Can I just finish this point? In Labour's costings document for its own energy price freeze, it includes Liz Truss's energy levy freeze and Rishi Sunak's VAT moratorium in its costings, saying that these candidates have committed to this sort of revenue loss, so the Labour Party can spend this much. Doesn't that make you just as bad as each other?
No, Tom, and sorry, I think different elements are being mixed together here. Actually, when Labour called for the removal of VAT on energy bills, we set out how we would make sure that would be paid for, and we don't see a long-term plan here. And, you know, there's a big contrast here, actually, between Labour and the Conservatives. When we've released these plans, we have said how we will pay for them. We have spelled that out. Now, of course, there may be discussion about different elements. We're open to that, but we said how we'll pay for them. Liz Truss in particular, though, on the other hand, and, you know, all of the Conservative Party has been behaving in this way. Liz Truss has actually 10 times flip-flopped around about what she's going to do on these energy bills. They're not getting a grip, and they could, by adopting Labour's plan, make sure we don't see that catastrophic increase in the price cap coming through. As I said, we've set out how we will pay for that. We've not had that clarity from the Conservative candidates. And the real impact of this, it's not about some kind of political game, as we both know. The real impact of it is people right now sat at home thinking, how on earth am I going to be covering those extra thousands of pounds I'm going to have to pay to heat my home? What's going to be lost? You know, which rooms am I not going to be heating? Am I not going to be able to buy my kids a school uniform that they need? That is the kind of decision people are taking right now. And they deserve better, frankly, than the fantasy economics that we're seeing from the Conservatives.
It's a really, really seismic issue. It is, however, the second point in Labour's costings document pointing to the Liz Truss plan and the Rishi Sunak plan, which Labour say are uncosted but are included in Labour's costings document. I do want to move on, though, because in the Times this morning, there's a very interesting story about approvals for gas and oil extraction in the North Sea. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, wants to fast-track those, get that gas out of the North Sea and increase our supply, and we know that energy costs are a demand and supply issue. Greenpeace, however, are holding that up with legal action. Where does the Labour Party stand on whether or not this oil and gas should be being extracted and on Greenpeace's legal action there?
Well, we should instead be seeing what many other countries are focused on, which is the sprint in renewables. That's what's needed for our country right now. I mean, we've seen, for example, enormous impediments put in the way of onshore wind. We've seen approvals for solar schemes also taking such a long time. We've seen also tidal energy not moving forward in our country. And we've seen enormous blockages on nuclear as well. Really, we should be focused not just on delivering those technologies, but actually getting the jobs from those technologies for our own country. I would say also we should be focused on carbon capture and storage. That is a huge, huge area of potential for the northeast of Scotland, for many other parts of our country as well. And yet we've had 12 years where we've barely moved forward. Same applies when it comes to green hydrogen. And quite frankly, people who I talk with in both the oil and gas industries and other industries, they talk about decarbonising those jobs. They talk about their ambitions to have the jobs of the future based in their communities. I'm afraid the Conservatives are light years behind all of that. They're just setting their face against change rather than making sure we grasp it and get the benefits of it for jobs in our own country.
Now, we do have to let you go, Anneliese Dodds, but in a word, yes or no, if you would, on that specific question, does Labour support the legal action taken by Greenpeace?
Well, we don't engage in legal action. We're a political party. We make a political argument, and our political argument is that we want to see our country getting the benefits of renewables and the jobs from renewables. I'm afraid we're not seeing that right now.
I'm sure people can make their own minds up as to whether that question was answered or not. But Anneliese Dodds, really appreciate your time, as always, this morning on The Briefing. Thank you for joining us.